This episode of Marijuana Today Daily is brought to you by our friends over at the Atlantic Farms Medical Marijuana Dispensary of Portland, Maine, which is located right down the street from where I live and is known as being the medical marijuana dispensary that is also a gas station where you can buy things like snacks and drinks alongside medical marijuana products. Check them out over at theatlanticfarms.com. That's theatlanticfarms.com. Good morning, Marijuana Nation. It's Tuesday, September 29th, 2020, and you're tuned in to episode 985 of Marijuana Today Daily. I'm your host, Shay Gunther, and I'll be walking you through today's marijuana news and headlines. As always, we have a full and busy day of cannabis news in our hands, so let's jump right into it. Unfortunately, we return to the storyline of the West being on fire because the West is rather big and a lot of it is burning right now. This time, Bloomberg News takes a broader look at the overall loss of this year's outdoor harvest for a lot of companies, with next month being known as Croptober around indoor cultivation circles. In this piece, it not only examines the direct fallout from the climate change-driven wildfires burning up millions of acres of land, but also pokes around some of the indirect effects on the cannabis industry, as some farmers have chosen to harvest earlier than planned so as to realize at least some of their crop, which leads to lower overall yields and quality levels. With a lot of time still left in this year's fire season, I have a feeling this storyline will be back again. It also drives home the point that if your business plan revolves around growing outdoor cannabis in the West, you might want to reevaluate your plans because the future does not look any better. Yesterday, marijuana legalization activists in Nebraska announced their plan to file a new medical marijuana legalization ballot measure for 2022, following the scuttling of a proposed measure by the state's Supreme Court earlier this month, following a lawsuit filed by a Republican prohibitionist sheriff. That measure had received enough qualified signatures of support, but was tossed out on a legal technicality just ahead of the printing of ballots. Nebraskans for Medical Marijuana announced their plans yesterday for a new measure centered around the short and sweet statement, quote, "Persons in the state of Nebraska shall have the right to cannabis in all forms for medical purposes," unquote. There's some interesting nuance behind the campaign's one-sentence statement, which I encourage you to read about in full over at Kyle Yeager's piece at Marijuana Moment. Best of luck to everyone involved in pushing that one forward. Our final top story in the day is a relatively good one, as the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission approved late last week a plan to allow for the home delivery of legal cannabis. We've covered this particular storyline before, with the initial plan limiting drivers to performing deliveries of dispensary products directly, with no direct ability to buy cannabis wholesale for packaging and sales themselves. Thankfully, that limited model has been expanded in the new plan just approved on Thursday, with a second type of delivery license being made available that would allow drivers to buy wholesale cannabis to white label themselves with their own brands, which would allow them to capture more profit. Massachusetts delivery licenses will be restricted for the first 3 years to participants in the state's social equity program. The commission will hold open a public comment window until later next month and will cast a final vote on the whole delivery program on October 29th. Another good one to read in full. This is a program that could and should be expanded to other states. Those are the top stories for today. It's time for Marijuana Today Daily Headlines Blitz. Before we blitz on headlines, let's quickly thank our sponsor, the Atlantic Farms Medical Marijuana Dispensary of Portland, Maine, which is located right down the street from where I live and is known as being the medical cannabis dispensary that is also a gas station, where you can buy things like snacks and drinks alongside medical marijuana products. If you're in or around the Portland, Maine area, make sure to swing by the Atlantic Farms and let them know that I said to say hello. And then while you're there, check out their incredibly affordable range of top quality Maine medical marijuana products, with everything from flower to edibles and concentrates. They have the full spread. You can check out the menu over at the Atlantic Farms on their website, found at theatlanticfarms.com, where you can also learn more about one of the cooler and more unique dispensaries that I've seen and the good folks behind the whole operation. One more time, that's theatlanticfarms.com. All right, time for the Blitz. Bruce Barcott over at Leafly takes a good look at the activist scene in South Dakota, specifically the two proposed ballot measures being put before voters in November, one an initiative while the other is a constitutional amendment. Bruce nicely lays out the reasoning for why South Dakota cannabis activists are putting forth the two questions, as the constitutional amendment is designed to protect the initiative from being legislated away by conservative state lawmakers, who have shown their own disdain for democracy in the past by overriding citizens' initiatives. This one is super interesting and worthy of a full dive in. A group of activists in New Jersey just published their first ad promoting ballot measure Public Question 1, which would make adult use cannabis legal. Polls indicate strong support for legal cannabis reform in the Garden State, but the NJ Can 2020 campaign says it will keep up a big push through November to drive stronger turnout. One programming note on this storyline: the latest episode of our weekly show Weed Wonks actually features an in-depth discussion on New Jersey with NJ Can 2020 campaign manager Axel Owen. You can check that out over at weedwonks.com. The Canna blog insightfully jumps into Oregon's legal cannabis industry, specifically the case of an industrial hemp entrepreneur who is suing his landlord for evicting him from a warehouse where 36,000 pounds of hemp was being stored, pressing the case that a moratorium on evictions running in Oregon applies. As Jesse Mondry at the Canna blog points out, the eviction moratorium filed by Oregon Governor Kate Brown did not specifically ban hemp or marijuana businesses, so I would add this one to your list of stories to read in full. Lots of interesting bits here. Last week, the lieutenant governors of Illinois and Michigan got on a Zoom call with their counterpart from Pennsylvania to talk about the legalization of marijuana. Illinois Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton and Michigan Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist offered up advice for how to best implement adult use legalization to Pennsylvania Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman. You can read more about what the good lieutenant governors had to say and watch the entire 43-minute interaction yourself over at Marijuana Moment. Returning to New Jersey for a quick headline, we have a recent poll finding that the coronavirus pandemic has moved a significant number of voters into changing their position to be in favor of adult use legalization. Of those polled, a full 1/5 said that the pandemic has moved them to rethink their position in the positive direction. This is a good overall phenomenon to have a handle on, no matter what state you do business or politics in. Deborah Borchardt at Green Market Report has a good update on the Ianthus storyline, with the large multi-state operator in a bit of corporate trouble following the resignation of its CEO Hadley Ford in April, following the revelation of a scandal involving personal loans Ford took out with Gotham Green Partners, Ianthus's major investor. In Deborah's latest update, a federal judge in British Columbia has rejected a proposed recapitalization plan that was put forth by the company's investors. This one is complicated and has lots of moving parts, so maybe a good one to read in full if this one catches your attention. And finally for today, we jump up to my corner of the country in Maine for a look at the launch of the state's adult use sales program. Just a month shy of 4 years after voters passed adult use via ballot measure in 2016. Adult use shops in Maine are slated to open up on October 9th, and Bruce Barcott grabs one more headline on the day with a full listing of all the adult use license holders in the Pine Tree State, along with a helpful note showing whether those shops will be opening up on opening day. If you're up here with me in Maine, open this one up. I should probably point out that our sponsor Atlantic Farms is one of those companies listed. Those are the headlines and news for the day. I'll be back with you again on Thursday with another information-packed episode of Marijuana Today Daily. But in the meantime, if you have any stories to share or feedback to give, zip us an email to headlines@mjtodaydaily.com. And while you're clicking around the interwebs, swing over to our website at mjtodaydaily.com to find links to all the news we cover. Thanks to our sponsor, Atlantic Farms, and to our awesome patron listeners for the support that makes this show possible. To join the illustrious ranks of the patron listeners yourself, swing over to our website at mjtodaydaily.com and click on that big blue button at the top of the page that says Become a Patron. I'm your host, Shay Gunther. Thanks for tuning in and starting your day with marijuana today.
One take, Shay. One take.